Hello and welcome to the Game Cupboard. My name's Rick and today I'd like to talk to you about Raji, an ancient epic on the Nintendo Switch. But before we begin, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and just click that little bell icon to make sure that you're always notified. Raji, an ancient epic, is the new and indeed first game from Nodding Heads Games, a super tiny studio of 13 people from several different countries and cultures. It's an action-adventure game set in ancient India, and you play as a young girl named Raji, who's on a quest to rescue her brother Gulu, who's been kidnapped by the demon Mahabalasura. I think I said that right. It's a nice twist on the usual damsel in distress trope, but what really worked for me is how the story's told. It's heavily influenced by Hindu mythology, and as such we have Goddess Durga and Lord Vishnu constantly narrating over the action, and I think it's really cool. In a way it reminds me of Clash of the Titans, with the gods looking down at humanity and discussing our actions. It's a nice way to drop exposition without pausing the action, and I really appreciated that. I thought the cutscenes were really cool too. They play out like puppet shows, further adding to the idea that humanity is there for the entertainment of gods, and also emphasising a connection to Raji's brother Gulu, as during the game's opening he's seen putting on a shadow puppet show at the carnival. Sadly, these cutscenes are compressed to high heaven, and there's a lot of pixelation on the colour gradients, making it look really ugly at times. There are mandalas dotted around each level too, which act as simple puzzles to unlock the way and deliver a small slice of Raji and Gulu's backstory. Similarly, there are corrupted holy trees that need to be restored to open the way forward and advance the story. Both these puzzle types are a variation on a theme. Rotate the thing until it falls in line, and repeat with the next piece until everything is lined up. They are super simple and can barely be called puzzles, but they're a fun little distraction and break the levels up nicely. There are also huge murals painted on the walls depicting the various Hindu gods, and approaching them and pressing Y will activate a dialogue explaining who the god is and giving us an abridged version of one of their stories. As much as I enjoyed these stories, stopping to watch them brings the game to a grinding halt, and it makes Raji's quest not feel as urgent. I tried activating one and carrying on with the adventure, but it cut off before the story ended, and there are usually 3 or 4 murals in close proximity, so in order to fully enjoy these moments, you have to stand still for up to 5 minutes at a time. I'm not sure there's a way they could have been better implemented, however, and they are optional, so if you want to ignore them, you can do, as they have no importance to the overall story of the game. But if you're interested in learning a little more about the world and the time and the culture surrounding the game, they are worth pausing the action for. The game takes place over 5 unique locations, each with their own distinct colour palette and gameplay elements. For example, the first area is focused on training, whereas the second seems to be heavily focused on combat and parkour, whereas the third focuses more on environmental puzzles. It breaks the game up nicely and manages to keep things fresh and interesting, and no one area ever outstays its welcome. The gameplay is focused around exploration and combat. Raji's a circus performer, so has incredible acrobatic skills that allow her to climb high walls and ledges, run across walls, and leap over gaps with an almost superhuman ability. And for the most part, exploration feels really good. Raji responds to button presses well enough, and the game's parkour feels fluid and satisfying when pulled off properly. However, it doesn't always go to plan. Climbing, jumping and dodge rolling all use the same button, so there's an element of context sensitivity to the button presses. Pressing B against a plain wall will cause Raji to run up and bounce off it, but pressing B against a wall with scuff marks or moss indicating it's climbable will cause her to climb it. This makes the game feel very linear at times, and lessens the feeling of exploration and discovery. It can also feel frustrating trying to climb a ledge that looks climbable, only for Raji to launch herself halfway across the screen. The camera can cause issues from time to time too. The overhead perspective works well, but sometimes it shifts to give you a more cinematic view, and it can make lining up a jump harder than it needs to be, or completely obscure the way forward. It isn't game breaking, but I did find myself getting more annoyed than I probably should have. There aren't much in the way of collectibles to find in Raji, an ancient epic. Over the course of the game, Raji will find 3 weapons: a trident, a bow and arrow, and a sword and shield, as well as 3 magical powers, lightning, fire and ice, that can be equipped on each weapon. Each element has 3 attacks attached to it, which in turn can be upgraded 3 times, and finding shrines with white balls of light will give Raji an upgrade point to use in one of these attacks, making it more powerful. There are a handful of shrines along the main path, but to find them all, you'll need to explore a little bit. Upgrades aren't permanent and can be equipped and moved into other attacks at will, so even if you don't find all of the upgrade points, you can keep powered up with a bit of micromanagement. There are also shrines with purple light that replenish lost hit points, and shrines with orange light that power up Raji's special attack. And that's it for collectibles in Raji, which if I'm honest, I don't mind at all. Too many collectibles can be distracting, and if a game isn't careful, it can see itself become a Ubisoft title. Overall, I enjoy the exploration in Raji, despite the occasional hiccup. One element I didn't enjoy, however, is the combat. In fact, there are times when I genuinely hated it. Raji has a light attack, a heavy attack, and a dodge. Pressing the light attack 3 times performs a short combo, and pressing the heavy attack 3 times performs a short combo, and pressing an attack button and dodge at the same time performs another heavy attack. This is fine when pressing B and Y together, but pressing B and X together is just uncomfortable. Whichever element you have equipped to your weapon will power you up during combat, stunning enemies in place for a short time or unleashing an attack that hits all enemies in the area, but these effects are random. Raji can run up and bounce off of walls and follow up with an attack, or spin around pillars for a special attack, which should turn combat into an acrobatic dance of death, but it doesn't. Raji's attacks feel slow and floaty, and when your attacks do land on an enemy, there's little to no feedback. Damage felt arbitrary, and there were multiple occasions where I thought I wasn't doing any damage only for the enemy to fall down dead. When some enemies hit Raji, she gets sent flying across the screen like Simon Belmont, and it's possible for enemies to stun lock her to death like this, which just feels cheap and frustrating. The acrobatic moves are a pain in the arse to pull off, and the novelty wore off really quick. When a fight starts, a circle of light appears to create an arena which only disappears once the fight has ended, making surfaces that could be used for acrobatic combat out of bounds. And on one occasion, the enemy I was fighting got bored and flew off, locking Raji in the arena and forcing me to restart. And when I retried the fight, it happened again. Combat arenas like this are frankly terrible game design. It forces limitations onto the player, and in a game where the whole idea behind the combat is acrobatics, it makes no sense to restrict the player like this. And once I got the sword and shield, that was it. I fully powered up my lightning attacks and wailed on enemies until they died, stopping only to block occasionally. And it pains me to admit, I never even saw an ice attack. Lightning was so powerful by this time in the game that I didn't feel the need to so much as look at the ice power. And then the game ended. It utterly broke the combat, but it did save the game for me. I feel like the developers tried too much. The acrobatics is a really nice idea, but I feel the developers should have focused on making the core combat tighter and more satisfying, and then added the extra flair on top of that once the core had been perfected. But instead, what we have is a combat system that's functional instead of fun. Now, I will admit, when I started the game again to check out handheld mode, I had a much better time with the combat. I was spamming dodge and launching at enemies with heavy attacks, but because I was spamming dodge, I'd find myself bouncing off walls and pillars more often, performing the acrobatic attacks and taking much less hits from enemies. Feedback from hits also felt better in handheld mode, and combat during my second playthrough felt a little more satisfying. I still stand by what I said, as I do think the combat has issues, but during my second playthrough, it clicked. But it shouldn't have taken that long to do so in the first place. There are a couple of other mechanics in combat too, like performing finishing moves on enemies with A once they've taken a substantial beating, which causes them to drop health recovery. Pressing A once it appears above an enemy's head will immediately interrupt Raji's movement or attack and force her straight into a finisher animation. Now, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but I like it. Far too often in games with similar mechanics, you can miss a finisher because you're locked into a combat animation, so having the ability to break out of it here is genuinely nice. There are also arenas with a totem that powers up the more damage you inflict on the enemies, rewarding you with a charge to Raji's special move. The special move is powerful and extremely useful in a pinch, but I kept forgetting it was there, and once you've used up all its charges, you have to find another totem or shrine to replenish it, making its uses extremely limited. Visually, I absolutely love the aesthetic of Raji in Ancient Epic. The use of colour and light in each chapter is stunning. It makes each location feel vastly different to the one that came before it. Whether it be the heat of the desert or the cool air of a watery temple, Raji's locales feel alive and look absolutely beautiful. The same can't be said for the textures, however, many of which are bland or flat. I think this is an issue with Unreal Engine, and the fact the game's running on the Switch. If Square Enix can't fix the crappy textures in Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PS4, what chance do Nodding Head Games have when working with inferior hardware? The textures look slightly better in handheld mode due to the reduced size, but the game image looks blurry compared to when it's on a TV, and everything looks just a little uglier for it. There are some genuinely striking views and environments on show in this world, and a part of me wishes I'd waited for the PS4 or Steam release, as I have a feeling it will look considerably better on better hardware. There were a couple of times where Raji was struggling to run, most notably during the third area. There was a lot of slowdown and stuttering, and the music and ambient sound wouldn't loop correctly, pausing and clipping before replaying instead of seamlessly transitioning. This was a shame, because the music and voice acting is simply superb, and it perfectly complements the visuals and storytelling. Despite the fact I've been quite negative about a couple of things, I actually really enjoyed Raji and Ancient Epic. I loved the world and the adventure, and the way the story was being told to me. I really enjoyed the exploration, parkour and puzzle solving, so much so that I found myself disappointed whenever a fight started. The simple and rudimentary puzzles were a nice distraction and never felt like they were getting in the way, and wandering off the beaten path to find an upgrade point was always rewarding. The voice acting is absolutely top notch, and I love the way the music complements the visuals and makes the whole experience feel almost like a storybook come to life. All that being said, there are still a few issues I feel need to be addressed. As much as the combat grew on me by the time my second playthrough came around, I feel that this is too long for a combat system to click, and a lot of my initial complaints, such as Raji feeling too floaty and impacts not feeling crunchy enough, persisted. On top of the sometimes bland textures and slowdown, there are a lot of bugs that need to be fixed. Without giving anything away, one bug triggered right at the end of the game and made me miss the ending. I actually had to watch the end of the game on YouTube after my first playthrough. So I think it'll be a much better game in a few patches time. I also think a lot of the issues I have with Raji will be fixed in a sequel, which there absolutely has to be. The world and story is too rich to just leave at one game. And I think with more experience under their belt, the team at Nodding Head Games will do it even better second time around. Whenever a problem would occur, I'd remind myself it was made by a team of 13 people. The game oozes love, sincerity and pride, and the 5 or so hours I spent playing through the adventure felt like a celebration of Hindu culture. There is so much heart in Raji and Ancient Epic, and because of that it makes it impossible to view any of the issues it has as anything other than teething issues with the first game. I can't wait to see what it looks like a few months down the line with a couple of patches under its belt, and I certainly can't wait to see what the team do next. So do I recommend Raji and Ancient Epic? Absolutely. If you can get past the floaty combat, simple textures and occasional bug, you'll find a sweet little adventure that's full of heart and promise, and one that I'm glad I took a chance with. But what about you guys? Have you played it? What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below or over on Twitter @GameCupboardRick. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, especially if you've made it this far, and I'll see you in the next video.